Julian Croft stood on the glass-fronted balcony of his mezzanine office, a stark silhouette against the brightly lit chaos of the Grand Oak Galleria below. His jaw was a tight, angry knot. Below him, the Saturday afternoon shopping frenzy had curdled into a thick soup of anxiety. A child was missing. I want all exits on soft lockdown. Tier 1, he barked into the sleek black radio clipped to his lapel. No one in or out without a visual check from security. And get me a roving unit in the west parking structure, now. His eyes, sharp and unforgiving, scanned the swirling mass of people. He saw his uniformed security team moving with practiced, if slightly frantic, efficiency. He saw shoppers clutching their own children closer, their faces painted with vicarious fear. And then he saw him. An old man, standing perfectly still near the central fountain, a faded olive-drab veteran's cap perched on his white hair. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't gawking. He was just watching. Observing the scene with a disconcerting calm that grated on Julian's frayed nerves. "Mark," Julian snapped into the radio, his voice a low growl of command. "That old-timer by the fountain. He's a visual obstruction and a potential liability. Get him out of the main concourse. Tell him to go have a coffee or go home." Julian clicked the radio off, his judgment passed as swiftly and coldly as a winter frost. In his world of calculated risks and controlled outcomes, a stationary old man was a variable he didn't need, a piece of clutter in the middle of his crisis. He turned his back on the scene, confident that his order would be carried out, that the clutter would be removed. He had a protocol to manage, a disaster to contain. He had no way of knowing that the man he had just dismissed as a liability held the only key, the one solution that no protocol could ever provide. He had just cast aside the one person who could save them all, and the journey to understanding that mistake would unravel everything Julian Croft thought he knew about strength, value, and the quiet heroes who walk unseen among us. Arthur Pendleton was 78 years old. He lived in a small, meticulously clean apartment 3 bus transfers away from the Galleria. The air in his home smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. On a small table by his favorite armchair sat a single, silver-framed photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes and a little girl with a bright, gap-toothed grin. His wife, Eleanor, and his granddaughter, Lily. Both were gone now, leaving behind a silence in the small apartment that was often louder than any noise. His life had been one of service, first to his country in the humid, tangled jungles of a war long past, then to his family, and now, in the long, quiet years of his widowerhood, he served memory. Each morning, he would put on a pair of crisply ironed trousers and a simple polo shirt. He would carefully place the veteran's cap on his head, its fabric softened by decades of sun and rain. The mall was not a shopping destination for him, it was a landscape of life. He would sit on the benches, nursing a single small coffee for hours, not out of stinginess, but out of a desire to simply be a part of the world's steady current. He watched teenagers fall in love, families argue over trivial things, toddlers take their first determined steps away from their mothers. He was a silent, unobtrusive spectator to the grand, messy pageant of everyday existence. It was his antidote to the crushing stillness of his empty apartment. His quietness was often mistaken for vacancy, his stillness for infirmity. But behind his pale blue eyes, a mind honed by decades of observation was constantly at work. He noticed things. He saw the subtle shift in a security guard's posture that signaled the end of a long shift. He recognized the almost imperceptible tremor in a young woman's hand as she waited for a job interview at the department store. He saw the patterns in the chaos, the unspoken stories that played out in fleeting glances and hurried gestures. And he carried a skill, a silent language learned from a place of profound love and deeper loss. He had learned American Sign Language for Lily, his granddaughter, who had been born into a world of silence. Her illness had taken her at the age of 6, but the language remained, a beautiful, bittersweet relic of a love that still defined him. It was a private language, a key to a door he rarely opened for anyone else. Julian Croft, at 42, inhabited a world that was the precise inverse of Arthur's. His office was a sterile, high-tech fortress of glass and steel perched above the mall he managed with an iron will. The only art on his walls was a series of framed architectural blueprints of the building, a testament to his belief in structure and control. A bank of 16 monitors glowed with silent, sweeping views of every corridor, entrance, and service bay. He saw the mall not as a place of human connection, but as a complex machine, a system of assets and liabilities to be managed for maximum profit and minimal risk. Success had come to him early, but it had left him feeling hollow, isolated within the very luxury it afforded. His personal life was as sterile as his office. A bitter divorce years earlier had cost him half his fortune and all of his trust in human connection. It had been a betrayal rooted in carelessness, his own. He had been too focused on his career, too dismissive of the emotional undercurrents in his own home. He had sworn never to make that mistake again, but his solution was not to engage more deeply, but to withdraw completely. He built walls, not bridges. This obsession with control was cemented by a professional trauma that haunted his every decision. Before the Galleria, he had managed a 5-star hotel. A sophisticated team of thieves, exploiting a minor security blind spot he had overlooked, had made off with millions in jewels from a visiting dignitary's suite. The ensuing media storm had been brutal. The headlines painted him as incompetent, arrogant, and negligent. He was fired publicly. The humiliation had forged his management style into something rigid and unforgiving. He trusted only technology, protocol, and a hand-picked team who mirrored his own cynical efficiency. He saw weakness everywhere, and he had zero tolerance for it. To Julian Croft, people were the weakest link in any system. The first crackle over the security radio was deceptively calm. Code Atom, Central Fountain. Mother reports a missing 5-year-old boy. Name is Leo. Blue shirt, dinosaur print. For Julian, the words were an electric shock. He was instantly on his feet, his mind racing through the tiered response protocol he had drilled into his team 100 times. This was the scenario that kept him awake at night, the ultimate failure of control. He watched on his monitors as the mall's pleasant ambient music cut out, replaced by a calm, pre-recorded female voice announcing the lockdown. Metal grills began to descend with a soft hum over the main entrances, sealing the massive building. From his perch, he could see the frantic mother, her face a mask of raw terror, surrounded by his security personnel. And a few yards away, he saw the old man again. Arthur Pendleton had risen from his bench. He was not looking at the security team or the distraught mother. His gaze was lower, scanning the bases of the large potted plants, the dark spaces beneath the benches, the entrance to the children's play area. Julian felt a surge of irritation. The old man was in the way, a civilian variable in a professional operation. He strode out of his office and took the private elevator down to the main floor. The atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The cheerful hum of commerce was gone, replaced by a tense, waiting silence punctuated by anxious whispers and the crying of other children. He pushed through the crowd, his face a grim mask of authority. He saw his head of security, Mark, trying to get more information from the sobbing mother. Then he saw Arthur. The old man had approached one of the younger security guards and was speaking to him quietly, gesturing toward the play area. The guard, a young man named Peterson, looked flustered and dismissive. Julian intercepted them, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic. "Peterson, what's going on? Get back to your designated search quadrant." "Sir," Peterson stammered, "this gentleman was just suggesting." "I don't care what he was suggesting," Julian cut him off, not even bothering to look at Arthur. He finally turned his cold gaze on the old veteran. "Sir," he said, the word, sir, a weapon of condescension. "This is a secure situation being handled by professionals. Your presence here is complicating matters. If you can't help, please stay out of the way." Mark, Julian's ever-loyal bulldog, stepped in beside him. He looked Arthur up and down, taking in the worn cap and the slightly stooped shoulders, and smirked. "We've got this, Pop," he said, patting Arthur's shoulder with patronizing familiarity before turning to follow Julian. The dismissal was absolute. The humiliation was public. A small ripple of laughter came from a few teenagers nearby. Arthur felt a familiar, dull ache of being rendered invisible. He didn't say a word. He simply watched them go, his pale blue eyes holding no anger, only a deep, quiet sorrow. They were looking, but they weren't seeing. They were searching for a body, a shape, a child in a blue shirt. He knew you had to search for the fear. You had to think like a small, terrified soul. He took a slow breath, turned away from the professionals, and began his own silent, methodical search. An hour passed. It was an eternity. The soft lockdown had become a hard lockdown. The police were en route, and Julian could already feel the hot breath of local news reporters on his neck. His state-of-the-art security system, his highly trained team, his meticulous protocols, all of it had failed. The boy, Leo, had vanished as if into thin air. Every store had been searched twice. Every restroom, every stockroom, every corner of the sprawling parking garages. Nothing. Julian was back in his office, the walls of his glass fortress feeling like they were closing in. He paced like a caged animal, the radio on his hip crackling with fruitless updates. Sector 4, clear, East Wing, negative. He slammed his hand on his desk, the sharp crack echoing in the silent room. He had failed again. The ghost of his past humiliation rose before him, whispering of headlines and public disgrace. In his frustration, he turned to the monitors, rewinding the footage from the central concourse. He watched the initial moments of chaos again, his finger poised on the controls. His eyes kept snagging on the figure of the old man. While his own team fanned out in a pre-planned grid, Arthur moved with a different logic. He saw the old man walk slowly to the candy store, peer behind the large gumball machine, then move to the cinema complex, his eyes scanning the dark, recessed doorways where movie posters were displayed. He wasn't rushing. He was thinking. He checked the lost and found kiosk, spoke briefly to the attendant, then headed toward the service corridor near the food court, an area off-limits to the public. Julian felt a flicker of something other than irritation. It was a grudging, microscopic sliver of intrigue. The old man's movements weren't random. They followed a pattern, a logic that Julian's own rigid system had missed. He was tracing the path a scared child might take, not a logical path, but an emotional one. From the bright, loud center to the darker, quieter edges. Just then, a new voice burst from the radio, breathless and young. "I found him. I found him. He's in the maintenance closet behind the arcade." A wave of dizzying relief washed over Julian, so potent it almost buckled his knees. "Status?" he demanded. "Is the boy okay?" I don't know," the voice, belonging to a teenage arcade employee, faltered. "He's back in the corner. He won't come out. He won't talk. He's just crying." Julian was already moving. He sprinted from his office, down the stairs, and through the now hushed mall. A small crowd had gathered near the arcade, held back by two of his guards. Mark was there, shining a flashlight into the dark, narrow closet. Julian pushed his way to the front. There, huddled behind a stack of floor buffers and cleaning supplies, was a small shape in a blue shirt. The boy, Leo, had his face buried in his knees, his small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Leo?" Mark said, his voice too loud, too gruff. "It's okay, buddy. We're here to help. Your mom is waiting." The boy only flinched, pressing himself further into the corner. He let out a small, terrified whimper. "Get the mother," Julian ordered. Maybe he'll respond to her, but he knew, with a sinking feeling, that in the child's heightened state of terror, even his mother's voice might not be enough. They tried for several minutes. They offered candy. They spoke in soft, cajoling tones. Nothing worked. The boy was trapped in a prison of his own fear. And then, a figure moved quietly through the line of security guards. It was Arthur. He had arrived not with the frantic rush of the others, but with the same steady, unhurried pace as before. He looked past Julian, past Mark, his eyes fixed on the small, trembling form in the closet. He saw not a problem to be solved, but a terrified heart to be soothed. He turned his calm gaze to Julian. "He's too frightened to listen," Arthur said, his voice low and steady. "Words are just noise to him right now." He paused, his expression unreadable. "I think I can help." Julian stared at him. He saw the faded cap, the wrinkled hands, the plain clothes. Every instinct, every scar from his past, screamed at him to dismiss this man, to rely on the professionals, to call in paramedics or child psychologists. But his professionals had failed. His protocols had failed. He looked from Arthur's confident, compassionate eyes to the terrified child in the closet, and he saw the chasm between his world of systems and the raw, human reality of the situation. He had no other options. The machinery of his authority had ground to a halt. He swallowed the hard, bitter pill of his pride. It felt like gravel in his throat. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Do it." The moment was a vacuum. The anxious chatter of the crowd, the crackle of the radios, the entire world seemed to fall silent. Mark shot Julian a look of disbelief, but Julian ignored him. His eyes were locked on Arthur. The old veteran didn't speak another word. He handed his cap to a nearby guard and slowly, with the careful movements of age, lowered himself to one knee on the cold tile floor. He didn't try to get too close. He stayed at the entrance of the closet, giving the boy his space. He simply kneeled there for a long moment, a figure of quiet patience, letting the child's terror-filled senses adjust to his presence. Leo's silent sobs hitched. He peeked through the curtain of his own arms, his eyes wide and slick with tears, and saw the old man kneeling before him. Then, Arthur raised his hands. They were weathered, calloused hands, the hands of a man who had known work and hardship. But they moved with an impossible grace. He brought his right hand to his chest, thumb extended, and tapped it twice. The sign for friend. The boy stopped crying. His head lifted fully. He watched, mesmerized. Arthur's hands moved again, a fluid, questioning gesture. "You lost?" A gasp rippled through the small crowd of onlookers. Mark's jaw hung slightly open. Julian felt a strange, prickling sensation on his skin, as if he were witnessing something sacred. The little boy, Leo, stared at Arthur's hands for a long moment. Then, hesitantly, his own small, trembling hand came up. He made a clumsy, childlike gesture, a fluttering motion near his chest. The sign for scared. Arthur nodded slowly, his expression one of profound empathy. He signed back, his movements slow and clear, like a story being told in the air. "I understand. It's loud out there. It's safe in here." He pointed to the closet, then pointed to his own chest. "My name is Arthur. What's your name?" Leo watched, his little face a canvas of dawning comprehension. He used his fingers to spell out, haltingly, Leo. A gentle smile touched Arthur's lips for the first time. He signed back, "Leo. That's a strong name. Like a lion." He made the sign for lion, a claw-like hand mimicking a mane around his face. For the first time in over an hour, a sound came from the boy. It was a tiny, watery giggle. Arthur continued the silent conversation. "Your mom is waiting. She is very sad. She wants to give you a big hug." He mimed a huge, enveloping hug. "Will you let me take you to her? I will hold your hand. I won't let go." He extended his open hand, palm up, a simple, unwavering offer of trust. Leo looked at the outstretched hand. He looked at Arthur's kind, patient face. Then, with a deliberation that seemed to take all the courage in his small body, he began to crawl out from behind the floor buffer. He ignored the security guards, the onlookers, the imposing figure of Julian Croft. He shuffled forward and placed his small hand into Arthur's large, weathered one. Arthur's fingers closed gently around his. He rose slowly to his feet, holding the boy's hand securely. He led Leo out of the dark closet and into the bright, open space of the mall. The crowd parted for them as if by royal decree. At the end of the newly formed aisle, Leo's mother was waiting, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears of relief streaming down her face. The reunion was a storm of emotion that left no eye dry. As the mother enveloped her son, sobbing his name, she looked over at Arthur with a gratitude so immense it needed no words. After a few moments, when the initial wave of emotion had crested, Julian Croft stepped forward. His usual armor of arrogance was gone, stripped away. He looked humbled, profoundly shaken. He stood before his entire security team and the remaining shoppers. "Attention, please," he said, his voice unsteady but clear. He looked directly at Arthur. "Today, our systems failed. Our training failed. I failed." He took a deep breath. "We were all reminded that the greatest strength, the most effective tool, isn't always in a uniform or a title. It's in compassion. It's in a skill we failed to see because we weren't looking." He turned to face Arthur fully. "Mr. Pendleton," he said, the name spoken with a deep, newfound respect. "On behalf of the Grand Oak Galleria, I want to thank you. And I want to apologize for my earlier ignorance." He extended his own hand. "You did more for that boy in 2 minutes than my entire team could do in an hour." Arthur simply took his hand and gave it a firm, forgiving shake. In that handshake, a world of status, judgment, and pride dissolved. The next morning, Arthur received a call. It was Julian Croft's personal assistant, requesting his presence at the mall manager's office. Arthur rode the bus, his mind calm. He expected a gift card, perhaps, or a more formal thank you. He did not expect to be escorted to the sterile, glass-walled office he had only ever seen from below. Julian stood to greet him, not from behind his massive desk, but by the door. He was dressed in a simple sweater, not a suit. The tension was gone from his shoulders. "Arthur," he said, using his first name. "Please, come in. Coffee?" They sat in armchairs facing each other, not across the desk of power. Julian was direct. "I've been doing some thinking," he began. "A lot of thinking. What you did yesterday, it was a masterclass. I want that here. Permanently. I want to offer you a position as a senior security consultant, specializing in special circumstances. The pay would be substantial. You would answer only to me." It was a life-changing offer. More money than Arthur had seen in decades. A position of respect and authority. Arthur listened patiently, a small, thoughtful smile on his face. When Julian finished, he took a slow sip of his coffee. "Mr. Croft." "Julian," he corrected himself. "I appreciate the offer more than you know. It's a fine and generous thing. But I'm not looking for a job. I'm retired." He set his cup down. "What I did yesterday. I didn't do it for money or a title. I did it because it needed to be done. Because I could." Julian's face fell slightly, a flicker of the old disappointment. He had tried to solve this new problem the only way he knew how, with money and status. But Arthur wasn't finished. "However," he continued, a new light in his eyes, "I do have an idea. If you're serious about making a change," he leaned forward. "What if we taught everyone? Not just security. The kiosk workers, the cleaning staff, the store clerks. What if we created a program to train them how to recognize and help vulnerable people? A lost child, a confused senior, someone having a panic attack. We could teach them de-escalation, simple communication techniques, basic sign language for emergencies. We could make this entire mall the safest, most compassionate place it could possibly be. He paused. I would be happy to help you build that. Not as an employee. As a partner. Julian stared at him. The idea was bigger, better, and more profound than his own clumsy offer. It wasn't about hiring one expert, it was about elevating everyone. It was about community, not command. It was a solution rooted in the very human element he had always distrusted. In that moment, Julian's transformation was complete. A partnership, Julian said, a genuine, unforced smile spreading across his face. I like the sound of that. We'll call it the Pendleton Protocol. Their collaboration began immediately. Julian, with his formidable resources and logistical acumen, cleared every bureaucratic hurdle. Arthur, with his quiet wisdom and deep well of experience, designed the curriculum. The first training session was held a month later in one of the mall's vacant storefronts. The attendees were a mix of security guards, janitorial staff, and young retail workers, all a little skeptical. Mark, the security chief, sat in the front row, his arms crossed, his expression dubious. Arthur began not with rules or directives, but with a story about a young soldier in his platoon who had lost his hearing in an explosion, and how learning to communicate with him had saved the man's life more than once. He spoke about his granddaughter, Lily, and the world of joy that sign language had opened for them. His stories were not about procedure, they were about connection. By the end of the 2-hour session, the atmosphere in the room had changed. Mark, the hardened skeptic, was the first to his feet, practicing the sign for help with a look of intense concentration. He became Arthur's most dedicated student, often staying late to ask questions. Within 6 months, the Pendleton Protocol was a resounding success. Every employee at the Grand Oak Galleria wore a small, discreet pin on their uniform, a simple design of 2 open hands, signifying they were trained and ready to assist. The mall's atmosphere softened. Shoppers noticed the change. The staff seemed more aware, more engaged, more human. Julian, inspired by the program's success and his growing friendship with Arthur, took it a step further. He commissioned the renovation of an underused lounge area near the food court. Guided by Arthur's input, they transformed it into Leo's Landing, a designated quiet space for anyone experiencing sensory overload. It had sound. Arthur, who lived with the ghosts of his past, found a new purpose and a way to ensure his legacy of kindness would live on. A year after Leo was found, Julian and Arthur stood at the back of a grand ballroom in a Chicago hotel. They were the keynote speakers at the National Retail Security Conference. Julian had insisted. When it was his turn to speak, Julian walked to the podium and looked out at a sea of faces just like his own used to be, confident, cynical, and obsessed with the bottom line. For years, I believed security was about technology, walls, and control, he told them. I was wrong. The greatest asset you will ever have is not on a balance sheet. It's the person mopping your floors. It's the teenager selling pretzels. It's the quiet old man sitting by the fountain. He then told them the story of Leo and Arthur. When he finished, he introduced Arthur, who received a standing ovation that lasted for 3 full minutes. Back at the Galleria a few weeks later, Julian and Arthur stood together on the mezzanine balcony, looking down at the familiar, bustling scene. They watched as a young mother, distracted by her phone, momentarily lost track of her toddler. The little girl started to wander toward the escalators, her face beginning to crumple with fear. Before panic could set in, a young woman from the coffee kiosk, one of Arthur's first trainees, knelt down, made the gentle sign for friend, and calmly guided the child back to her relieved mother. The entire event took less than 10 seconds. Julian and Arthur exchanged a look. It was a look of shared accomplishment, of a quiet, profound victory. The system worked. True worth, Julian now understood, was not measured in profit margins or stock prices. It was measured in acts of kindness, in moments of connection, in the courage to see past the uniform and the title to the heart of the person within. The real treasures were not locked in safes, but walked freely through the crowded corridors of the world, often unseen, waiting only for someone to have the humility to look, and the wisdom to finally see.